Good afternoon, everyone. If you would take your seats and turn off your phones, please. We want all the time with Father Greg and with Eileen and Jorge that we can get. My name is Jason Biasi. I'm the Director of Worship here at Bayview. It's been an amazing week with our guests. This room is as full as it is, not just because of Homeboy's reputation, but because you've heard him speak or your friend has, and you said, you got to drop what you're doing and come hear him because they're amazing. So thank you, friends, for being with us and for inspiring us. Some housekeeping, so you can tell that people are hard at work setting up for opera. Don Giovanni is taking shape, so it's looking good. Thank you to Chris Luba, my colleague, for making space for us in the middle of the space as it's being transformed. What that means is we got a hard stop at 5. Like, we got to get out so they can keep building sets. So we're going to move Greg and Eileen and Jorge right outside of this parking lot. The poor people who didn't get his autograph right before, because I pulled him up on stage, are first in line, and then the rest after that. I think that's all I have. Oh, lots of you have asked, how can we support them financially? Good question. So, Homeboy Industries, go to their website. That's the easiest way to do it. Greg informs me he's terrible at the ask. He said, why don't you do it? Look, and if you believe in something and you think it's doing beautiful things in the world, support it. That's why God gives us the resources in the first place. So, Greg, all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason, for your kindness. So I'm going to yak for a little bit, and then towards the end, I'm going to have Eileen and Jorge join me up here because you have 3 seats, so we might as well use them. And then somehow we're going to figure out how to get questions to us. So think about what you want to ask, because I'm going to try not to repeat myself. That'll be a challenge. So, and then, and then we'll get out of here at 5. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your hospitality. It's been so remarkable. You've been so gracious. God is in your every kindness shown to the 3 of us. So on their behalf for now, thank you for that. Whenever I hold a microphone, I always think of this homie named Louis Perez, who was, worked at Homeboy for like 10 years. He kind of ran the place in the early years, and just a character and a force of nature, and, gang member, went to prison, shot caller, in recovery, but he had been a heroin addict for many years. But he just ran the place, and when I couldn't give a talk, I would asked him to take my place, and he liked doing it, and he kind of inhabited this role of speaking. And so he and I went out to dinner one night, and he was giving me tips on how to speak publicly. And he said, you gotta pepper your talk with self-defecating humor. And I said, yeah, no shit. That is some good advice there. So brace yourselves. There's a kind of a vision that has led you to join the 3 of us this past week, and for me it's exhilarating, it's heartening, because you embody that vision of wanting the world to look differently than it looks. And it's very important to kind of use that vision as a touchstone. The prophet Habakkuk writes, the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it. But none of us want to wait, con los brazos cruzados. We want to make something happen. And again, after a conversation I had with somebody last night, thinking about what is God's dream come true? What's God's hope? And I always think union with God is kind of a hallway, but we want to get to the ballroom, and the ballroom is where God hopes will go, which is to create a community of kinship such that God might recognize it, a place of cherished belonging, and that's just essential, because one Christian is no Christian, really, as the early Christians used to say. And so we want to somehow create this place, the kinship of God, a place of connection and belonging, and where we imagine a circle of compassion, and then truly we imagine nobody standing outside that circle. So, for 42 years I've walked with gang members. They've taught me so much. The day won't ever come when I have more courage than with Feline and Jorge here, and all the many thousands of gang members who have just shown me the presence of God, presencing God's self in our midst. But, one of the things they taught me how to do is text, and I'm so grateful to them, because I find it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. And I'm pretty dexterous at it, LOL and OMG and BTW. And the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh hell no. And I use that almost constantly. And I know I'm not alone in feeling vexed by this autocorrect thing. That thing always kind of gets me. There was a homegirl named Bertha, kind of a tough homegirl, who on a Sunday, she texted me and she said, "Where are you at?" And so I texted her back, "I am about to speak to a room full of monjas." And monjas is nuns, sisters, religious women in Spanish. I'm about to speak to a room full of monjas. And I pushed send, and autocorrect told her that I was about to speak to a room full of ninjas. Which she thought was pretty darn interesting. The homies, even while I'm here, they found me. They're always asking for feria, for money, and they're always hitting me up, and they have to pay this bill, and the rent is short, or whatever. I remember many years ago, a homie texted me, and he said, "I just need $100 to finish off my rent," and I didn't have it. So I wrote him back simply, "Things are tight." And I pushed send, and autocorrect told him, "Thongs are tight." And he wrote me back, "Sorry to hear that. What about my rent?" So I told you that to tell you this. One thing that we have every morning is, our morning meeting. It's from 10 minutes to 9 till like 9:05. And it has a lot of ritual. We read the land acknowledgement, we read the mission statement. We sing happy birthday. We always have multiple people, out of 800 employees, multiple people who have birthdays. And then we do announcements, and the cafe comes up and says, "Here's the plate, the dish of the day," and the bakery comes, and "Here's the baked good of the day," and that kind of thing. And it's very moving. During the announcements, people will say of the other, "Hey, let's acknowledge Hector because he's 1 year sober today," and then people go nuts. And someone will say, "Well, Maria got her kids back yesterday," and then people are sobbing. It's so beautiful. Heaven won't be different than our morning meeting at Homeboy. And then we end, towards the end, there's a thought for the day. One of the homies gives a thought for the day, 5 minutes, and then somebody does a prayer. So after morning meeting one day, I grabbed Manuel and Poncho, two homies who worked there. I said, "Come with me, we're going to Palm Desert to speak at a high school." So we got in the car, Manuel was in the front seat. And we were 20 minutes on the road when Manuel gets an incoming text, and he chuckles. And I go, "What is it?" "Oh," he goes, "It's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office." Well, I just saw Snoopy. Snoopy was there at the morning meeting. He gave me a big abrazo to begin the day. Manuel and Snoopy work in the clock-in room where they clock in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of gang members every day. I would not want this job, It just becomes a surprise. Gang members are occasionally attitudinal, so I would not want that job. And I said, well, what's he say? Oh, it's dumb. Hang on. Here it is. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy. Well, I nearly drove into oncoming traffic, and then I realized something, that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They are from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other, because I remember. Now they shoot text messages to each other. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How can we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? So during these days, we've explored a kind of more expansive sense of who God is. St. Ignatius of Loyola would say, take care to keep always before your eyes first God. And so we come to understand that God says to us, I won't be God without you. And we feel the cariño, the affection, the tenderness of that. And so because of it, the byproduct of allowing that in is that we want to help God's dream to become true, or as Jesus puts it, that you may be one. And so we explore and excavate the things that keep us apart. You know, for so long, all our religious endeavor has been about a moral quest. But the moral quest has never kept us moral. It's just kept us from each other. And how odd that that would be in the end counter to God's dream come true, which is that you be one, that we be one. And so we try to align our hearts with the energies of God, and we know that fear and self-absorption keeps us away. I don't say sin because it's not helpful. You know, the notion of sin really worked. It kept our butts in the pews since the beginning of institutionalized churches, and it worked. But I don't think you could make the case that it helped. And that's important nowadays to kind of underscore. At Homeboy, you know, we do what we do, and we've done it for 38 years. But I can remember being at some conference in San Francisco where some guy from Boston, and he was an academic, and he had designed a gang intervention program. He's pounding on the podium, and he goes, people, listen, this works. And I remember writing in my program, yeah, but I bet it doesn't help. And I think that's the truth, that not everything that works helps, but everything that helps works. And so we had a chance somewhere 1,500 years ago or longer to respond to the invitation. My joy, yours, your joy complete. But instead, we opted for indictment and the fear of hell, and that's too bad, because it worked, but it didn't help. And how do we reclaim a notion of inviting people to joy rather than warning them? And so fear and self-absorption can get in the way, that can keep us from each other and keep us from the kinship that God hopes for. So as a priest, for 42 years, I sang Mass on a rotating basis at all these probation detention facilities. And my Saturdays are always the same. I come do 2 masses out in the Afueras, and then I come back to Dolores Mission because I know so many people there. And I do, every Saturday is kind of the same. It's 1 o'clock baptism and 2 o'clock quinceañera, where a girl turns 15. 3 o'clock wedding, a 4 o'clock exorcism. Just checking to see if you're still listening. I've actually never done one of those, but. So I raced back and it was like 12:35 and I had a 1 o'clock baptism. So I said, well, I have time to go to my office. So I went up on First Street, one of our old offices, headquarters, and I was going through the mail, and all of a sudden this woman named Lisa walks into the office. And it's a Saturday, nobody else is there, and I find out her name, Lisa, that she's 35 years old. She's a gang member, tattooed, felon, parolee, heroin addict, had been recently in barely surviving human trafficking. And this is the first time she's come into the office. The homies call her La Gritona, which means she's the one who screams, because she's always screaming. She's screaming at the bartender next door, who throws her out like clockwork every day and shakes her fist at him. And then she screams into the payphone across the street from our office, just let me stay the night, pleading with family members or friends. And this is the first time she's come into my office, and now it's 12:45, 15 minutes to my baptism. So she comes into my inner sanctum, she looks at the photograph, she introduces herself, she sits down, she launches right in. I need help. Ooh, I've been to like 50 rehabs. I'm known all over, nationwide. And then she takes a little detour. She said, I went to Catholic schools all my life. Graduated from elementary. I even graduated from Lincoln, Sacred Heart High School in Lincoln Heights. And then she gets still. In fact, the first time I ever used heroin was right after I graduated. And I've been trying to stop since the moment I began. And I watched as she leaned her head against the wall behind her, and her eyes became like 2 ponds, water rising to meet its edges and spilling over. And she cried and she cried. I let her cry. Until finally she leveled her gaze at me and she said with great deliberation, I am a disgrace. And suddenly her shame met mine, because when I had seen her step into my office that afternoon, I had mistaken her for an interruption. Nobody's evil, nobody's sinful. We're just afraid and self-absorbed. And the more we can align our hearts to the God of love. The God creates us as the beloved. And in this we find a roomy capacity to love. So we try to lean in with curiosity, which is the only antidote I know for judgment. We're human beings, so we're going to judge the minute our 2 feet hit the floor when we get up every day. But if we lean in with curiosity, and the homies talk about find the thorn underneath, let's find out what language is this behavior speaking. Since goodness has nothing to, our behavior has nothing to do with our goodness, because we're unshakably good. But sometimes we can't see it. Our access to that truth is compromised. So how do we keep ourselves alert? How do we remind each other of our unshakable goodness, to which there are no exceptions? So one of our businesses is Homeboy Silk Screen, and it was started like 31 years ago by a couple, Ruben and Christina. And, so they get a lot of shirt orders from, mainly jiu-jitsu universities, and they do screen printing, and they do thousands of shirts, for like 5K runs and family reunions in high schools and universities. And they do high quality work, reasonably priced, and they UPS to Petoskey. Again, I'm just saying, but, and so, Ruben texted me one day and he said, I'm sending Gilbert to you, which it can't be good. And so I go, oh my gosh. And so I start to get ready for, he's colored outside the lines, and we're running a business here, and I have no idea what he's done, but I know it can't be good. And so 20 minutes after I get the text, Gilbert walks into my office. I flag him in, he sits down. And I said, what happened? He said, well, supposedly I stole some shirts. I said, well, did you? He goes, yes. And he goes, well, it wasn't really stealing. I mean, it was 3 shirts. I mean, there was 1,000 of them. I said, oh, okay, let me see if I got this right. I need a car, I want a car, I go to a car lot, they have 1,000 cars. I mean, come on. I take 1 car. It's not really stealing because there are 1,000 of them. And he looks at me and he says, exactly. And I don't know, but we just fell out of our chairs howling with laughter. And whatever it was, or whatever it is, or whatever people do when they color outside the lines, you want to lean in, you want to be curious about it. You don't want to be toppled by behavior, because behavior is just a language. My friend Pema Chodron, who's a Buddhist nun, says, you are the sky. Everything else is weather. And I think that's helpful, because what we're trying to do, rather than warn people, do good and avoid evil, we're reminding people of the truth of who they are. We're holding up a mirror so that they can inhabit that truth, and no bullet can pierce it. And no 4 prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it, because it is huge. With the ICE raids in Los Angeles, we wanted to do something, and we had a lot of parents of who were undocumented, parents of the homies and homegirls. And so a lot of them were street vendors. They would make food and stuff and sell them on the streets, but they were too afraid to go out to the streets. So we had this thing called Hope Alley, and we set up little puestos and stands, and we would sell people's tamales or carnitas or whatever that they had prepared at home. And then the homies and the homegirls would do it in the event, that ICE agents came by, which they were doing quite a bit, that they could make money. It was just from like 10 to 2. One woman said she made more money in those 4 hours than she would normally make in an entire week. And so after we did this, I was in my office and a bunch of homies there, and one of them says, what do we do now? And before I could say anything, one of the homies says, love is always the next thing to do. And I think that is a good reminder. And like the mystics, we find an anchor within, born of a love that cannot be agitated. Many years ago, I was invited to receive an award at Boyle and Marymount University in Los Angeles from the Department of Education. And on the night of the big thing, I couldn't do it. So I said, could I send a homie to accept this award on my behalf? Knowing that after I came back, I had to speak in San Francisco, I would give him the award that they had bestowed. And they said, sure. So I got a homie named Pascual Peña who worked at the silkscreen factory, as it turns out. And I called him into my office. I said, hey, can you accept this award for me at LMU? And he said, sure. I said, great, thank you for doing that. Oh, by the way, you have to give a little speech. Oh, hell no, I'm not going to give a speech. I go, well, just write a couple paragraphs. It's no big deal. And he was terrified. And so a woman who used to work at Homeboy, Kara Gould, was a Jesuit volunteer, she drove him to the university, and she was telling me how terrified he was. And she said at every stop sign he threatened to leap out of the car. He said, I can't speak in front of people. I'd be too scared. And she gave him a tip that we have all heard before, which is when you get up in front of people to speak and you're frightened, just imagine that your entire audience is naked. Relax, I'm not using this tactic now. I'm noticing the front row here anyway. And she says, just imagine your audience is naked. And he goes, I can't do that. I'd be staring the whole time. So they get to LMU, and it goes from bad to worse because it's just packed, standing room only, and receiving the award accepting the award for Father Greg Boyle was Pascual Peña. So he goes up there, people clap politely, and he has his little piece of paper, and I just remember the last part. He said, because Homeboy Industries decided to believe in me, I've decided to believe in myself. And the best way I can think of paying them back is by changing my life. And that's exactly what I've done. Thank you. So he goes to take a seat. Well, the crowd goes nuts. Standing ovation, people are crying. He looks at Kara, she's crying. She looks at a stranger on his other side, and he's crying. And after this went on forever, and finally he turns to Kara, damn, they're clapping a lot for G. And she said, they're not clapping for Father Greg, they're clapping for you. No, and he was like you had electrocuted him. And suddenly this entire crowd of people had decided just to remind him of who he was and to invite him to the fullness of joy. God just wants us to live in God's heart. And once we have those eyes, all we will see is glorious, which is how that audience saw Pascual. In the gospel, the disciples say to Jesus a curious thing: increase our faith. In our modern ears, I don't know what we think. Maybe it's about what should we believe. Increase our faith. But the original language meant, to what ought we to give our hearts? That's a whole other kind of question. To what ought we to give our hearts? Therein lies the purpose of our Christian living. To what ought we to give our hearts? The creation of a community of kinship such that God might recognize it. Where we try as best we can to go to the margins because we know that's the only way they'll get erased. And we live in times where people want to, create margins. And Jesus just wanted to erase them. And first we have to help people see themselves as God does, which is really a challenge. But once that becomes our focus, we can see it clearly. And we need to be able to see it about ourselves. I remember a kid named Danny, who was 10 years old, came into my office, and I was writing something. When I looked up, I saw that he's a little short kid, and he had a huge, easel thing, to sketch things, and he's sketching. And then every 2 minutes, as he's holding the thing up on his knee, he has a pencil, and he holds this out, some technique he had learned in cartoons or something. And it dawns on me, he's drawing a portrait of me. And it makes me laugh. And when I laugh, he says, "Don't move." And that made me laugh to think that it would make any damn difference if I move. And when I laughed again, he really got steely. He said, "I said, don't move." And I went, "Okay," and I froze, And in short order, he was finished. And so he ripped this sheet off this huge tablet, and he lays it down on my desk. And there is me, I think. But it looks like I've been beat down with the proverbial ugly stick. And, I have an eyeball up here and a nose down here, and my glasses are all wobbly-jawed. And so I look at him and I go, "Wow, Danny, this is me." He goes, "Yes." I said, "Wow, I don't really know what to say. It's really interesting." And he looks at me and he said, "What you expect? You moved." And for me, it always stood for kind of a sense of how God sees us, which enables us to see gloriously once we know the truth. That you hear the words, "Don't move." Why would you move? Especially if you knew in the deepest part of your heart that you are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. Why would you move? I was with 3 homies in a car, and we were driving, we were laughing, they were all bagging on each other. It was quite clever and funny, and I glanced at my gas tank, and I went, "Oh my God." And I turned to Anthony in the front seat. I said, "Hey, be on the lookout for a gas station." And for some reason, he doesn't trust my judgment, so he leans over and he sees the gas gauge. He goes, "You're fine." I said, "Well, okay, I'm fine. It's on E." "Hello, E means empty." And he looked at me with shock. And he said, "E means empty?" And I said, "Yeah. What did you think it meant?" "Enough." "Well, what did you think F stood for?" And he said, "Finished." And once I had thanked him, for visiting our planet, I thought, that's pretty good. That's exactly how we are. We look in the mirror and we think, finished. Or we think, empty. And God says, don't move. Because you're not going to be able to communicate that message unless you believe that to be true about yourself. That you are more than enough. And that you are fullness. And unshakably good. I went to the hospital to visit this guy named Duke. His name is William, but everybody calls him Duke. And he was shot on Christmas Eve. And so I didn't find out about it until Christmas Day, and I had Mass at the juvenile hall. And so afterwards I went over to White Memorial Hospital to visit him. And I walk in and he goes, "Gee, Merry Christmas. What did you bring me for Christmas?" And I said, "Not a damn thing." I said, "But God gave you this incredible gift." He said, "What?" I said, "Another shot at life," and because he was talking and it was going to be okay. He said, "Oh yeah, that." He goes, "Yeah, the doctor said the bullet pierced my lung and destroyed 3/4 of my lungs. That's almost half." So after I congratulated him on his mastery of fractions, he said, "Who'd you come to visit?" I said, "What?" "Who'd you come to see in the hospital?" "You!" Nah. I go, yeah. He just presumed I was there to see somebody else. That I was there to see some senora who was sick and in the hospital. And so we get to this place where we're unable to see as God sees because our access to that mystical vision is compromised. And as we walk each other home to the kinship of God, we help each other see the truth about ourselves. We don't need to wag our finger or shake our fist. We just need to roll up our sleeves. We don't need to point things out. We just need to point the way. And that's the task that we are given. For with love, we don't measure progress. We presume it. We just presume it. And we are all made for loving, and that the true measure of love is to love without measure. Many years ago, there was a homie we all called Bandit, and he was a bandit. And so I would ride my big old black beach cruiser in the housing projects of my parish, where we had 8 gangs at war with each other. And I can remember seeing him in his part of the projects where his gang kicked it, and he'd run up to cars and sell crack cocaine, which is what they did in those days. And then he'd come to the area where I was kicking it with his homies, and he'd notice me there. And he was never really ashamed or embarrassed. He was just making money and doing business. And I'd hand him my card endlessly, and he'd never come by. Until one day he did. He walked into Homeboy Industries, and I said, wow, I can't believe you're here. And he said, I'm tired of being tired. So he entered the 18-month program, and he got his GED, and he worked alongside enemies, and he excavated his wounds in therapy, and he healed. Essentially, he healed. And then when the 18 months were up, he was aided by our workforce development people, and then they found him a job at a warehouse, entry-level, low pay. Cut to 5 years later, he's running the whole warehouse. He's like the supervisor, the main guy. And then a couple of years after that, he's even higher and elevated and has more responsibilities. He buys a house. He and his wife, they have 3 daughters. And one day, I hadn't heard from him in a long time. He calls me on a Friday afternoon, and there's kind of panic in his voice, and he says, "You got to bless my daughter." I said, "Wow, what happened? Is she sick? Is she in the hospital?" And he said, No. Sunday night, we have to take her to, she's going to Humboldt College. She's going to college. But Humboldt is far north, and we're afraid, and she's a little chaparrita. Could you bless her before we go? And I said, oh my God, I'd be honored. You know, tomorrow's Saturday. I have an exorcism at 1. Just checking again. And why don't you come at 12:30? We'll do a little send-off. And so sure enough, at 12:30, Bandit and his wife and his 3 daughters, including little Jessica, who's going to Humboldt College, 18 years old. And so we stand in front of the altar, and I said, let's encircle her, and let's everybody touch her. Put your hands on her head, on her shoulder, grab her arm. Everybody touch her. And I tell them to, bow their heads and close their eyes. And as the homies say, I do a long-ass prayer. I go on and on. And suddenly I've noticed that we've all become chillones, which means we're all crying. And I don't know why we're crying, except for the fact that Bandit and his wife don't know anybody who's ever gone to college except me. Certainly nobody in their families. So, we wipe away our tears, and I finish, and trying to change the subject a little bit, I turn to Jessica. Hey, what are you going to study at Humboldt College? And she was very quick, forensic psychology. I go, dang, forensic psychology. And she goes, yeah, I want to study and Bandit says she wants to study the criminal mind. And Jessica looks at her father and she does all of these, And he goes, yeah, I'm going to be her first subject. So we go up to the car, and everybody pick up abrazos and they get in the pile in the car. But Bandit hangs back, and I'm glad he has. And I said, hey, can I tell you something? I give you credit for the man you've chosen to become, for choosing to walk in your own footsteps. I'm proud of you. And his eyes well up with tears, and he says, ¿Sabes qué? I'm proud of myself. All my life, people called me a lowlife, a bueno para nada, a good for nothing. I guess I showed them. I said, yeah, I guess you did. And the soul feels its worth. We all want to participate in the love that brings us back to the entrance of our hearts. One last story before I bring up Jorge and Feline. Homies in the early days would say, I'm ready for work. And I'd say things like, well, I have an opening in the bakery, but you have to work with X, Y, and Z. And I'd rattle off the names of enemies. And they'd always say the same thing that quite bothered me in my early days. They'd say, okay, I'll work with them, but I'm not going to talk to them. Which bothered me until later in my life I discovered that it's impossible to demonize people you know. Humans can't really sustain that. And so I had this kid, we all called him Youngster. He was 19 years old, little tiny guy. I thought he was ready, so I brought him to the Homeboy silkscreen factory, and I walk him in there and I introduce him to like 20 coworkers. And I watched him shake hands, firm handshake, looking people in the eye. To enemies, half the guys he shook hands with were rivals from enemy gangs. And I thought, wow, this is great. Until he gets to this last guy, a guy named Puppet. And when Puppet and Youngster are in each other's vicinity, they mumble something, they stare at their shoes, they won't shake hands. Well, I know they're enemies, but he just shook hands with a whole bunch of enemies. I discovered later that this was a hatred that was quite personal, and a hatred beyond which neither of them seemed to be able to get past. So I sensed that much at the moment. I said, look, if you guys can't hang working with each other, let me know. I got a bunch of people who want this job, and they don't say a word. Well, 6 months later, a Puppet leaves his home to go to a corner store some distance from his house. He buys something. On the way home, for some reason, he decides to take a detour. So he cuts down this alley. And because he's taken this detour, suddenly, unexpectedly, he's surrounded by 10 members of a rival gang, 10 against 1. They beat him so badly, he falls to the ground. While he's lying there, these guys will not stop kicking his head until he's lifeless. Somebody finds him, takes him to White Memorial Hospital, where he's declared effectively brain dead. But it's the policy there to keep him connected to machines for 48 hours, so you can have 2 days of a flat read with no brain activity. And then the doctors can sign the death certificate and make it official. I was speaking at St. Louis University. I flew home immediately, and I've seen a lot of horrible things in my life, but nothing to compare to the sight of this young man with his head swollen many times its size. It was absolutely horrifying. You could barely train your eyes on him. And as a priest, I said a blessing prayer. I anointed his forehead with oil. We disconnected. A week later, I buried him. But in that first 24 hours, I was alone in my office, 8 o'clock at night. And the phone rings. And it's youngster, Puppet's co-worker from the silk screen. Hey, that's messed up. About what happened to Puppet. I said, yeah, it is. And then he says with a certain amount of eagerness, is there anything I can do? Can I give him my blood? And we both fall silent under the weight of it. Until finally he chokes back his tears and he says with great deliberation, he was not my enemy. He was my friend. We worked together. Now, can I say that always happens at Homeboy Industries? Yeah. Any exceptions? I can't think of one. And it shouldn't surprise us that God's own dream come true for us, that we be one. Just happens to be our own deepest longing for each other. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, we wait for it. Thank you very much. Okay, there we go, yeah. And so I have no idea how, oh, thank you. You're kind. And so, I don't know. You go like this, I call on you, or somebody's running around with a microphone, or yeah, I think that's better, and I'll pass it to these guys. Yell it.
Many politicians run on the tough on crime, which always has sounded a little bit has a hollow ring to it for me. I'll start over. Many politicians run on the tough on crime sentence. Sounds a little hollow to me. It seems that our prison system mostly is about retaliation and not about rehabilitation, punishment versus healing. What changes would you like to see if you were in charge?
Well, first of all, thank God I'm not in charge. But we went through this a long time in the early years when we were reviled by people in LA, not gang members, but everybody else. Death threats, hate mail, bomb threats. And so it was the tough on crime versus soft on crime. But then it took us a while, it took us a solid 10 years when our bakery burned down in October of '99. And all of a sudden, LA Times editorial writes the next morning, Homeboy Bakery, Homeboy Industries belongs to the city. And it was a big rallying cry. Well, they had seen, I think, on a visceral level, that it's not tough on crime or soft. It's tough on crime or smart on crime. And once people are offered smart, they don't go back to tough. That's my experience. The point is, though, I think we need to propose, smart. And then people will rally around that. No matter what you ask next, I'm going to hand it to them. Anybody? Yeah, go ahead, right there. There she is. Oh.
I have a question for Jorge and Felipe.
Believe.
Okay. So I'm just getting out of rehab. And she kept telling me about the programs there. I was like 2 weeks out to my finish date. And she was just like, let's go talk to Steve. And man, she shared her story, and I just let her know, like, hey man, I'm 2 weeks out to leaving this program to nothing. Pretty much like I need something. And it just gave me a start there right there. So I was ready. I was like 7 months into rehab. I was like a little further in my rehabilitation. And even though I started, we still struggled. Like I said, it was Airbnbs and stuff for 3 months. You know, renting one Airbnb to another. And sometimes you rent an Airbnb and say you don't book the whole week, like somebody else will book it. So we have to gather our stuff and then move to another one. But pretty much we was ready. To me, I want to say I was ready. I was tired of being tired. I wanted more for myself.
I am a product of the Catholic school system and Catholic parishes, and many of my favorite priests were transferred and moved around, and we had new pastors. And so I guess I'm wondering how you achieved to stay in the same parish for so long, and how the Catholic Church, especially when you were getting started, how they didn't mess you up.
Thank you for presuming that. You know, so first of all, I'm a Jesuit, so I answer to my provincial and not to the cardinal. But I was pastor for only 6 years, from 1986 to 92. I had gone there right after I was ordained in 84, then I went to Bolivia, and then I came back for another summer, and then I did one more year of theological studies, and then I became pastor. So it was only 6 years. But I live in our Jesuit community there in Boyle Heights, and so I've been there for 42 years. So, yeah, you know, they didn't mess me up too much. I mean, I always had my battles with the cardinal in those days. In fact, I had a hard time coming back because there was a kind of this town ain't big enough for the two of us kind of thing. And so I had a period of exile where I was chaplain at Folsom Prison. But then, a new provincial assigned me to come back and do Homeboy full time. Bill was born in '88 during my time as pastor. So, but you know, we need to be the church we want to be. You know, so. And, you know, if our leadership widens the circle, we just have to decide they circle the wagons, we have to decide to widen the circle. That's our job, you know, as faithful and as disciples. So, I'm never too weighed down by any of that stuff. You know, I think if you lead, then the church will follow.
Mucho gusto, Padre.
Gracias. Oh, there you are. You're over there.
There. I really appreciate what you had to say about everything. My question, I've had it since the beginning, because I've been questioning, discerning God's voice and what God sounds like. And I've been walking with the Lord now for over 20 years, and I still ask that question. I'm wondering, how did you know? What did he say to you? And how did he confirm that you needed to do the mission that you're doing?
I don't think that you get a call, you wait for the call, you know, so you're always waiting, you're always listening. And the thing is, God's will is what you most deeply want. That's God's will. It's never different. It's like, wow, I really want to work with gang members in Los Angeles, or I want to be a teacher, but God wants me to do that. You know, I don't think it works works that way. That's why it's so important not to be a stranger to yourself. Feline, how do you know when God is kind of nudging you?
I feel like it's instinct. I don't question it. It's a sense of feeling. And I just go with it. And it tends to be, when I take these actions, I'm like, oh, makes sense. And after I've taken these actions, I see verifications.
How about one more? Yeah, right behind you, Jason.
Eileen, could you share with us a little bit about your story and how you became involved with Homeboy?
I got exposed to Homeboy Industries from one of my cousins who had been in the system, and she spoke highly about it, and she said, hey, I know you're struggling, go ahead, and she was encouraging me to go, and I never went, and one of the realizations when we really hit rock bottom, I walked in through the doors, and gratefully, thankfully, I'm here.
So let me just end by saying, I think the three of us, because we chit-chat every day, and we just find being in your presence has really been filling us with hope. You know, at Homeboy we say hope has an address. And the poet says, hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, that sings the song without the words and never stops at all. And this is what we aspire to do as we try to create, all of us, a community of kinship such that God might recognize it. That Homeboy is the front porch of the house everybody wants to live in. And so it's our task to imagine it and to roll up our sleeves and to widen the circle and to dismantle the barriers that exclude. And then somehow we all together become this force where we sing the song without the words. And may you never stop at all. Thank you all very much.